Though China, by Western standards, is still a very poor country, her mastery of modern technology and her industrial development have been far more rapid than most people ever expected. Now, if you were to ask a Chinese how this was done, the chances are that he would reply with two simple words: self-reliance. These words are a kind of shorthand covering a whole complex of ideas. They mean, for one thing, that China was determined not to become dependent on outside help. She paid off her indebtedness to the Soviet Union in 1965, and since then she's been going ahead under her own steam without any foreign aid or foreign investments. But self-reliance means much more than that. Every province, every city, every village is encouraged as far as it can to make what it needs for itself. As a result, there is now a truck factory in every one of China's provinces. Automobiles are made, I think, in 30 or more cities. Peasants in their villages build their own small hospitals. Even the army, as far as possible, grows its own food and makes its own medicines. China, in other words, has become a vast, do-it-yourself country.
For a nation to be self-reliant, it must first be able to feed itself. The disastrous food shortages in 1961-62 were an indication that agriculture had been neglected, and from then on large capital funds were made available for agricultural development. China, as a result, enjoyed 10 consecutive years of good harvests. With the grain share stockpile, the country has now passed the stage of improvisation from harvest to harvest. She still imports wheat, but exports large quantities of rice to over 20 countries. And the money she receives for rice is more than the cost of imported wheat. China has, in fact, become a net exporter of food. Conservation of natural resources is another necessity if a nation is to be self-reliant. Among the first acts of the new government was the institution of a huge reforestation program. Most of the logging is done in the far north, and for each tree felled, many others are planted. This backyard electric steel furnace in a small town in Yunnan province is an example of local self-reliance. It may not be economically efficient to produce steel in such small quantities, but this kind of efficiency is not the criterion the Chinese apply. They want to avoid what has happened in other developing countries, where the concentration of all advanced technology in a few major centers has left the vast mass of the peasant population quite untouched. This building in Sumo, a small town in the south, was until recently a workshop for repairing small tractors. The engineers working here, both men and women, decided that they could make their own tractors instead of buying them from the state. The authorities encouraged them to go ahead and provided them with the necessary tools. Learn to do something by doing it is another general slogan. And these young people told me that they made all kinds of mistakes before turning out usable machines. They are now supplying tractors to several nearby communes. This story is typical of thousands of local enterprises that have sprung up throughout the rural areas of China. By including the rural population in production, China is hoping gradually to lessen the great social differences between life in the cities and the life of the peasants in the country. But if China is to be nationally self-reliant, she must also develop her heavy industries. China has 8 large steel plants, but relative to the country's needs, the national output is still far too small. China today produces all her present requirements of oil. This is one of China's medium-sized refineries. Fully automated, it was designed and built by Chinese engineers. China is the biggest producer and the biggest exporter of textiles in the world. Automobiles are made in many cities, but the total production is small. China relies on public transport and the bicycle. Her economy is not yet capable of large-scale car production, but having seen the problems that automobiles have brought to Western societies, she has, as a matter of state policy, determined never to become a car culture. How do China's industrial workers live? This is the Cheng family. The father and mother both work at a factory in Peking that makes China's version of a Jeep. They are a typical family, except for the fact that they have no older relatives still living. The boy, Cheng Paozhou, is 14. His sister, Cheng Xiaofen, is 10. The family lives in an apartment consisting of 2 rather small rooms, a simple kitchen, bathroom and toilet. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng's combined monthly income is a little over $40 a month. Their expenses are small. They pay only $2 a month rent, and this includes heating, gas, electricity and water. They pay no taxes, and all medical expenses are covered by the factory. The family leaves shortly before 7 in the morning. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng to the factory, the children to school. The children's school is just 10 minutes' walk. The factory is within easy bicycling distance. Special factory buses bring workers living farther away. This is one of 15 factories in China that makes this kind of vehicle. Like a Jeep, it has 4-wheel drive. The factory is a complete production plant turning out engine, chassis and body. The factory works on 2 8-hour shifts. Mr. Cheng is a machinist. As part of the policy of self-reliance, workers on the assembly line are urged to use their own initiative and suggest any improvements that they think might help production. Mr. Cheng and 2 others are working out an improved design of a lathe. Mrs. Cheng works in another section of the factory. While in China, we drove hundreds of miles in this kind of vehicle, sometimes over very rough mountain roads. They're extremely sturdy in construction. They're somewhat hard on the springs. Finished vehicles being driven onto flatbed railroad cars. This factory is one of the smaller factories making this type of vehicle. It turns out around 10,000 a year.